I knew nothing about my biological father because my mother had never told me anything about him. I knew just little bits of information. My mother had told me his name and that he had last lived in the Detroit area some 25 years prior to this time. And I thought, well, what are the chances that he still lives there? And so this was the age before we used the internet for everything. And I went to the library in Santa Monica, California, and went to the Detroit phone book. They had a phone book section of phone books from major cities around the country, and I got the Detroit phone book, and I knew his name, so I looked up his name, and there were about 5 or 6 listings, and I wrote them all down and the corresponding numbers, and I went home, and I lived in an apartment that was probably as big as the space between us here. It was a tiny rent-controlled apartment, and I paced my 2 steps across and 3 steps back, nervous as all get out, just not knowing what to say. What would I do? What would I say? What if, maybe I'll never find him. Maybe, who knows? And I figured out these questions to ask. And so I called the first name on the list. Guy answers the phone. I said, I'm looking for John Sidney Woods. That was my dad's name. And he said, you're speaking with him. And I thought, okay, that can't be that easy. So then I had other questions. So I said, well, did you live in the Boston area in 1957? And he said, yes, he did live in the Boston area in 1957. And then I was like, oh, wait, maybe there's more than one John Sidney Woods that lived in the Boston area in 1957. So I said, were you married to an Armenian woman by the name of Adrian Pilibosian? That's my mom's Armenian maiden name. And he paused what seemed like for days, and he said, yes, I was. And I tracked my father down in a first phone call. So, yeah. And then, and there's this, elation, and then we have to sort of, have dialogue. How do we talk to one another? We haven't really had any contact, and how do we break the ice? What do we, where do we go now? what do we talk about now? And so we're talking about things, and then out of the blue, he says to me, son. And of course he said the word son, and I was like, oh my gosh, my father calling me son for the first time. He says, son, there's a couple of things you should know. I'm sure your mother's never told you. I was like, what? And he said, well, first of all, I want you to know that no matter what you were told or what you thought happened, I've always loved you and thought of you a lot. And, this is my biological father telling me for the first time in my life that he loved me. At least the first time that I could remember and actually register with me. And then he said, there's one other thing I'm sure your mother's never told you. I was like, what's that? And he said, I'm African American. And I remember I was standing in my little tiny room, and there was a mirror across the room from me, and I swear I kind of caught a glance of myself in the corner of the mirror, thinking wait, did I just change? What just happened? And then I wasn't saying anything, and so he was kind of, well, are you okay? You all right? And I said, yes. And I think I said something like, yeah, you're right. My mother never bothered to mention that. I'd always felt deeply connected to African American people, African American culture. And so it wasn't as if I was changed, because it helped recognize for me that, maybe this is why you've always felt that way. I could never explain it in my life. I'd always felt this deep connection to the culture, to the people, but there wasn't anything in my immediate family to suggest that I was anything but what they were, which was my mom's Armenian and my stepdad is Swedish. I was raised in an Armenian household. I went to an Armenian church when I was young. My grandparents spoke Armenian in the house. I learned Armenian. Slowly, I started to realize that my mom had kept this information from me, and slowly started to feel like I had been betrayed by my mom. And slowly, I felt anger building up in me. Why would she do this? Why wouldn't she tell me this? I was perplexed with this and deeply troubled by it. And I knew I had to call my mom to say, by the way, I found my dad hello, you didn't tell me. And then I got a phone call from a guy I hadn't talked to in a long time. It was a dear friend. He gave me this beautiful bit of advice. He said, no, don't you see that the torment that your mother went through, the shame that she has held, that she was given by her parents, Armenian immigrants who came to this country in the early 1900s, fled their war-torn country, fled the massacre of the Armenians, came here, raised your mom to marry one of their own. It was very, very strong in immigrant families, whether you're Armenian or Greek or Irish or Italian, marry one of your own. And here, your mom was with a black man, had a baby with a black man. They shamed her probably to an unbelievable degree, and she has held this shame your entire life. And you now have an opportunity to open a door for her, to forgive her and let her release that shame. I was like, oh my God, I'd never heard anything so beautiful. And, I've often heard that forgiveness is the hardest work that you'll ever do, but the most rewarding. And I truly believe that to be the case. Where the first contact with my biological father's mother, my granny, Lois E. Woods, it was like 6 a.m. and the phone rang, and I woke up and like, oh my gosh, who is calling me at this hour? I pick up the phone, and there's this deep Southern black voice on the other line. Hey, sugar, how you doing? It was my grandmother, and that's how I first met my grandmother, was on the phone. And then a week after that, I got this little care package in the mail, which had an envelope of photographs, which were photographs of me as a baby, her holding me as a baby, my grandmother and my father, and then there was a little tissue-wrapped object in that package, and when I unwrapped that tissue, it was my baby shoe. And my grandmother had kept my baby shoes all these years and sent me one, and I kept the other one on her bedside table. I think things happen for a reason, and we're not always sure what that reason is. Whether you want to call it divine intervention or God or whatever. I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing today if it didn't happen the way that it happened. Some people ask me, well, what if you had discovered earlier in your life? Or what if you had discovered that you were half white? Or, all these things would have been different. But it happened the way that it happened, and I now get to be a bridge. Since I've connected with them, I feel really connected to that part of my history, part of my heritage. They've embraced me, they've taken me in, I've been one of them. I wasn't raised that way, but that brings up a whole other issue of what makes us who we are. Your identity changes over time, over your whole life. It's not like you get to a place and you go, that's it, I'm done, I know exactly who I am. Things will happen in your life that will constantly alter and change who you are. Our identities are fluid, and they continually ebb and flow and change depending on what comes in and out of our lives.